You think your home is your ultimate fortress. Imagine being halfway across the globe, watching your mother on camera using a stolen key to divide your rooms among three lazy sisters. They decided I would just sleep on the sofa while they took the master bedrooms, but they forgot I designed security for major firms. This game officially starts when I hit that lockdown button. Let me tell you how they paid for their greed. My name is Grace Lockridge, and at 34 years old, I had finally achieved the kind of silence that money usually cannot buy. I was sitting on the private balcony of an ultra-exclusive resort nestled deep in the heart of the Swiss Alps, a place where the air is so crisp it feels like drinking cold water with every breath. For years, I had been the backbone of Vanguard Cybernetics, an architecture lead for high-stakes security projects that kept me tethered to a glowing monitor for 14 hours a day. I had just closed out a massive government contract, a project that had consumed 18 months of my life and pushed my sanity to the absolute edge. This vacation was my reward. It was meant to be 30 days of absolute isolation, no emails, no server alerts, and most importantly, no family drama. I remember staring out at the jagged, snow-capped peaks, sipping a coffee that cost $45, and feeling a rare sense of peace. My phone, which I had kept on Do Not Disturb for the last 2 weeks, was resting on the cedar table next to me. Then, it happened. The screen lit up with a persistent, rhythmic vibration that broke the stillness of the mountain morning. It was Juliana, my cousin. She was the only member of the Lockridge clan who did not look at my bank account as a communal watering hole. We had always been close, mostly because we were both outsiders in a family that valued aesthetics and entitlement over hard work. I hesitated before picking up, but Juliana never called unless something was burning down. I slid the bar to answer. "Grace, oh thank God you picked up." Juliana's voice came through, sounding like she was hyperventilating. I stood up, the peace of the Alps evaporating instantly. I could hear the wind whistling through the valley, but my heart was starting to thud against my ribs. "Juliana, slow down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am in the middle of nowhere. Is someone hurt? Is it Mom?" Juliana let out a dry, jagged laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "No, Grace, nobody is hurt. But you need to look at the family group chat right now. I know you muted it 6 months ago, but you have to open it, please, before they do any more damage." A familiar knot of dread twisted in my stomach. The Lockridge family chat was a toxic wasteland of passive-aggressive memes, requests for loans, and photos of my sister's latest shopping hauls. I had silenced it to preserve my mental health. With trembling fingers, I tapped the icon. The notification count was in the hundreds. I scrolled back to the beginning of the morning and felt the blood drain from my face. It started with a message from my mother. Evelyn. Her tone was breezy, as if she were announcing a Sunday brunch rather than an invasion. The first message read, "Oz, I have the key. It is time. We are making our move while Grace is distracted in Europe." Then came the photos. My heart stopped. It was my house, my brand new, $4 million contemporary villa in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. I had spent 3 years designing every inch of that place. The photos showed the front door standing wide open. My mother was smiling for a selfie in my foyer, holding a set of keys like a trophy. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning as I read the messages that followed. Evelyn had laid out a full floor plan. Brianna, my eldest sister, who had never held a job for more than 3 months, was assigned the master suite. It has the best light for my makeup tutorials. Brianna had replied with a string of heart emojis. Chloe, the middle sister who was perpetually in debt, was given the West Wing guest room with the view of the pool, and Savannah, the baby of the family, was gushing over the garden suite. The conversation turned sickeningly clinical as they discussed renovations. "We should definitely repaint that depressing gray Grace likes," Chloe wrote. "It needs to feel more like a home, not a tech office. I can't believe she has all this space to herself while we are struggling in those cramped apartments." My mother's response was the one that truly broke me. She wrote, "Don't worry about Grace. She is single and she is never home anyway. We will move her things into the basement, or she can just sleep on the sofa in the living room if she visits. There is no reason to waste a perfectly good bedroom on someone who does not have a family to care for. I felt a surge of nausea. The sofa. They were planning to turn me into a guest in the house I had paid for with every ounce of my labor. I looked at the timestamps. They had been in my house for 6 hours. I suddenly realized how they had gotten in. Last month, before I left for Switzerland, my mother had insisted on coming over to help me pack. She had been uncharacteristically helpful, even offering to run down to the local hardware store to get me more shipping tape. I remembered my spare key being on the kitchen island. She must have taken it and replaced it with a dummy, or simply walked to a kiosk and made a copy while I was in the shower. I had been so blinded by a rare moment of maternal affection that I had handed her the tools to rob me. The betrayal was not just emotional. It was a calculated strike. Juliana sent me a private message while I was still processing the chat. Grace, you don't know the half of it. I heard them talking at dinner last night. They have already given notice on their rentals. Brianna and Chloe told their landlords they were moving out by the end of the week. They are burning their bridges so they can force you to let them stay. If you kick them out, they will be legally homeless, and they are going to use that to make you look like a monster. I sat back down on the balcony, but I didn't see the mountains anymore. I saw my sisters, the 3 women who had spent their lives mocking my ambition while happily accepting my holiday gifts. Brianna, Chloe, and Savannah. They were vultures. They had waited until I was 6,000 miles away to dismantle my life. My mind raced through the legalities of California property law. I knew that once they moved their furniture in and established residency, it would take months, maybe a year, to evict them. They knew that too. They were counting on my fear of a public scandal to keep me quiet. Then, a new photo popped up in the group chat. It was a picture of the 4 of them in my dining room. They were gathered around my hand-carved walnut table. My mother was holding a bottle of 1996 Chateau Margaux that I had been saving for my 35th birthday. The cork was on the floor. They were pouring the $5,000 wine into cheap plastic cups because they couldn't find my crystal. Cheers to our new beginning, Savannah had captioned it. We are finally living the life we deserve. The sight of them drinking my wine, sitting in my chairs, and laughing about their theft triggered something inside me that I had spent years suppressing. For a moment, I was a panicked little girl again. Watching my mother take my childhood savings to pay for my sister's dance lessons. But that girl was gone. I was Grace Lockridge, and I didn't just write code. I built fortresses. I knew every vulnerability in a system, and my family had just exposed theirs. They thought they were moving into a dream home, but they had no idea they were walking into a digital cage. I closed the family chat. My hand was no longer shaking. The panic was replaced by a cold, crystalline rage that felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. I looked at my watch. It was 10 in the morning in Switzerland, which meant it was 1 in the morning in Los Angeles. They were likely asleep in my beds, tucked under my Italian linens, thinking they had won the lottery. I didn't call my mother. I didn't send an angry text to the group chat. That is what a victim would do. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal for Vanguard Cybernetics. I had a secondary account there, one tied to my personal consulting firm, Lockridge Defense Systems. My house was more than just a home. It was a testing ground for the latest in smart home automation and high-level encryption. Every door, every window, every light fixture, and even the water main was connected to a central nervous system that I had programmed myself. I looked at the live feed from the foyer camera. The house was dark. Except for a single light in the kitchen, I could see my mother's handbag sitting on the counter. Next to my half-empty bottle of wine, I felt a grim smile touch my lips. They had no idea that I hadn't just bought a house. I had built a weapon. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I began to draft an email to Marcus Thorne, my attorney. He was a man who enjoyed a good fight almost as much as he enjoyed his retainer. But first, I needed to talk to my security team, Iron Guard. They were the ones who handled the physical perimeter of Vanguard's headquarters. I had their CEO on speed dial. I looked out at the Swiss peaks one last time. The vacation was over. The hunt was beginning. I picked up the phone and dialed a number that would change the course of my family's lives forever. I didn't care about the cost. I didn't care about the optics. I was going to take back what was mine, and I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, none of them would ever want to step foot on my property again. The contrast between the silent majesty of the Alps and the ugly, greedy reality of my home in Silver Lake was jarring, but it gave me the clarity I needed. I was through being the ATM for the Lockridge family. I was through being the single daughter who didn't need a room. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you try to steal from the person who keeps the world's most dangerous data safe. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and hit the send button on my first command. The game was on. Silence is a powerful weapon in any high-stakes operation, and I decided to use it with surgical precision. I stared at the hundreds of notifications on my phone screen. The digital noise of my mother and sisters celebrating their successful invasion. And I chose not to type a single character. If I replied with anger, they would go on the defensive, perhaps even changing the passcodes I hadn't yet updated or hiding the stolen key. But if I remained a ghost, they would settle in. They would grow arrogant. They would start to treat my property like a conquered territory, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would eventually hang them in a court of law. I put my phone face down on the cedar table and walked over to my laptop. The luxury of the Swiss resort no longer mattered. I was back in the mindset of an architect, and my family was the vulnerability I needed to patch. I opened a secure, encrypted line and dialed a number that very few people in the world possessed. It belonged to Marcus Thorne. In the legal circles of Los Angeles, Marcus was less of an attorney and more of a demolition expert. He specialized in high-value asset litigation and property rights, charging a retainer of $75,000 just to pick up the phone. It was 4:15 in the morning in California when he answered on the second ring, his voice sounding as sharp and alert as if he were standing in a courtroom. "Grace," he said, "I assume you are calling because the mountains in Switzerland got boring, or because someone is about to have a very bad day." I told him everything. I described the stolen key, the group chat transcripts, and the photos of them drinking my wine. But then I gave him the detail that changed the entire nature of the situation. "Marcus, this is not just a domestic dispute over a house," I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold tone. "You know that as part of my contract with Vanguard Cybernetics, I am required to maintain a secure data node at my residence for emergency failovers. There is a Category 4 server room behind the library, protected by reinforced steel and a separate cooling system. It contains encrypted logs that are technically property of the federal government. By entering that house without my authorization, they have not just trespassed on a residential property, they have compromised a secure facility." I could hear the scratch of a pen on paper over the line. Marcus let out a slow, appreciative whistle. "Grace, that changes the stakes from a misdemeanor to a felony. In the state of California, we are looking at premeditated trespassing with the intent to commit a crime, especially if they touch any of that equipment. The fact that your mother duplicated the key while you were in the shower is the definition of premeditated. They didn't just stumble in, they planned an infiltration. If they so much as breathe on that server room door, I can have them in handcuffs before breakfast. But for now, we need to establish that you never gave them permission. Do not reply to that chat. Let them keep talking. Every word they type is another nail in their coffin." While Marcus began drafting the legal framework for a scorched earth eviction, I reached out to Elias Vance, the head of Iron Guard Security. Elias was a former Special Forces operator who now ran the most elite private security firm in the country. He had handled the perimeter for my firm's headquarters, and he knew my house's layout better than anyone. "Elias, I need a full hot swap of the entry systems." I told him, "I want the physical locks disabled. I want a complete transition to biometric and retinal scans for all primary access points. And I want it done tonight, while they are out of the house or asleep." Elias didn't ask questions about why. He only cared about the mission. "Consider it done. Grace. I have a team of 4 technicians who can be at your Silver Lake address in 60 minutes. We will install the new optical sensors behind the doorbell housing so they won't even notice they are being scanned. We will also set up high-definition infrared cameras with 360-degree coverage. There won't be a blind spot on that property. I also want the internal sensor suite activated. I added, I want to know exactly which room they are in. And I want the two-way audio system live. I want to hear every word they say. As Iron Guard began their silent work on the other side of the world, I spent the next 3 hours performing my own reconnaissance. I knew my sister's habits. They were incapable of keeping a secret if there was a way to profit from it. I started scouring local resale sites and social media marketplaces, filtering for high-end furniture in the Silver Lake area. My blood turned to ice when I found a listing on an upscale auction app. The seller was Brianna, and the item was my 1885 mahogany writing desk, a piece I had acquired at a gallery in London for $12,000. The description read, "Beautiful vintage desk, family heirloom, moving sale, asking price, $3,000. She had been in my house for less than 12 hours, and she was already selling my life piece by piece to fund whatever lifestyle she thought she was about to lead. I didn't stop there. I found Chloe's Instagram story, which showed her holding up my designer handbags in front of my walk-in closet mirror. She had tagged them with a caption that said, "Wardrobe refresh coming soon, DM for prices." They weren't just moving in, they were looting. I carefully took screenshots of every listing, every caption, and every timestamp. I recorded the IP metadata where possible and sent the entire file to Marcus. This was no longer just about a house. This was grand theft and conversion of property. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. My mother had raised them to believe that anything I earned was communal property, a tax I owed them for being the successful one. But they had forgotten that I didn't get this house by being nice. I got it by being the person who could find a needle in a digital haystack of a billion lines of code. I was the person who could shut down a city's power grid from a smartphone if I chose to. They were playing with fire in a house made of gasoline. I logged into the Iron Guard portal and watched the live feed as the technicians arrived at 2 a.m. Los Angeles time. They were like shadows. They disabled the electronic gate and moved onto the porch, using a specialized bypass tool. They removed the traditional deadbolt and replaced it with a sleek, black plate that looked like part of the original door design but contained a military-grade biometric scanner. They worked with the efficiency of a pit crew, swapping out the garage door's rolling code receiver and installing the hidden cameras in the eaves of the roof. Within 90 minutes, the status lights on my dashboard turned from red to green. The house was now a fortress. I had full control over the HVAC, the water, the electricity, and the locks. I could see the heat signatures of 4 bodies in the upstairs bedrooms. My mother was in the guest suite. Brianna was in my master bedroom, and the other 2 were scattered in the remaining rooms. They were sleeping soundly, dreaming of a life they hadn't earned, completely unaware that the very ground they were lying on was now under my total command. I looked at the speakers I had installed for the whole house audio system. They were hidden behind the vents, designed for playing ambient music, but they were also capable of projecting a voice with startling clarity. I tested the microphone on my laptop, seeing the levels bounce in the Swiss silence. "Not yet," I whispered to myself. I wanted them to wake up first. I wanted them to try to leave and realize they couldn't get back in. Or better yet, I wanted to wait until they were right in the middle of their grand move-in ceremony when the trucks arrived. I checked the flight schedules. There was a Swiss Air flight departing from Zurich at 6:45 in the morning, connecting through London and arriving at LAX by mid-afternoon. I booked a first-class seat using my miles, not even glancing at the cost. I didn't pack my bags with the usual care. I threw my clothes into my suitcase with a frantic, focused energy. I didn't tell Juliana I was coming. I didn't tell Marcus the exact time of my arrival. I wanted as few people as possible to know that I was closing the distance. As I checked out of the resort, the concierge looked at me with a confused expression. "Miss Lockridge, you still have 15 days left on your reservation. Is everything all right?" I smiled at him, but it was a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach my eyes. Everything is fine, I said. I just realized that I left something very important behind, and I need to go back and take care of it before it gets destroyed. I climbed into the black car that would take me to the airport, my laptop still open on my lap. I watched the camera feed of my front door. A light came on in the kitchen. It was Savannah, the youngest, probably going for a glass of water. She walked past the new biometric scanner without even glancing at it. She had no idea that her thumbprint was now useless, that her stolen key was nothing more than a piece of scrap metal, and that the woman she called her sister was currently flying across the Atlantic with enough legal and digital firepower to ruin her life for the next 20 years. The plane took off as the sun began to rise over the Alps, but I kept my window shade down. I didn't want to see the beauty of the world. I wanted to stay in the dark, staring at the glowing screen of my monitor, watching the Lockridge family move around my house like lab rats in a maze. Every mile the plane traveled brought me closer to the moment of impact. I had spent 34 years being the quiet one, the one who paid the bills and absorbed the insults. But as the engines roared and we leveled out at 38,000 feet, I knew that the Grace Lockridge who landed in Los Angeles would be a stranger to them. I was going home, not to live, but to reclaim my kingdom. I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair inside the primary conference room of Thorne & Associates. Located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles, the air conditioning was humming at a constant 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the shimmering heat waves I could see rising from the pavement on the giant monitors in front of me. Marcus Thorne sat to my left, sipping an espresso and watching the screens with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. We had 4 different angles of my Silver Lake property pulled up in high definition. The clarity was so sharp, I could see the individual leaves on the bird of paradise plants I had personally selected for the front walkway. It was 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, the exact time my mother had specified in the group chat for the invasion to begin, right on cue. 2 massive white moving trucks with Pacific Relocation painted on the sides rounded the corner and pulled up to the curb, blocking my driveway. A moment later, a caravan of 3 cars followed. My mother's silver sedan led the pack, followed by Brianna's aging luxury SUV and Chloe's cluttered hatchback. They parked haphazardly, jumping out of their vehicles with an energy that could only be described as predatory, through the wide-angle lens of the porch camera. I watched them assemble on the sidewalk. They looked like a victorious army returning to claim their spoils. My mother, Evelyn, was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and a floral dress, looking every bit the matriarch of a grand estate. Brianna was already holding her phone on a gimbal, likely filming a house tour for her 3,000 followers before she had even stepped inside. "Look at them," I said, my voice sounding flat in the quiet office. "They really think this is the day their lives change." Marcus didn't look away from the screen. People like this always believe the world owes them a shortcut. Grace, they don't see a house. They see a prize they managed to snatch while the owner wasn't looking. On the screen, my mother marched up the steps with a triumphant spring in her step. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the brass key, the one she had surreptitiously duplicated while I was vulnerable. She held it up for my sisters to see, a smug grin plastered across her face. I watched her hand reach for the door handle, her thumb searching for the familiar thumb turn of the old deadbolt, but her hand froze in midair. She leaned in closer, squinting at the spot where the keyhole used to be. The traditional hardware was gone. In its place was a seamless, matte black panel with a glowing blue ring in the center. The confusion on her face was almost comical. She tried to jam the brass key into the smooth glass surface of the biometric scanner, thinking perhaps it was just a fancy cover. When the key scraped uselessly against the reinforced casing, she stepped back and looked at the door as if it had personally insulted her. Brianna and Chloe crowded around her, their voices muffled by the exterior microphone until I dialed up the gain on the system. "Mom, what is that?" Brianna's voice came through the speakers, shrill and annoyed. "Put the key in. We have 2 trucks full of furniture sitting here, and the meter is running." "I don't know," Evelyn hissed, her frustration mounting. There was a normal lock here 2 weeks ago. Why is there a computer on the door? She tried the key again, more violently this time, stabbing at the digital interface as if she could force the brass through the electronics. The scanner let out a low, red pulse and a sharp double beep, signaling an unauthorized access attempt. Behind them, the 4 movers had climbed out of their trucks. They were burly men in sweat-stained gray t-shirts, and they were already looking at their watches. One of them, a man with a clipboard who looked like he had been doing this for 20 years, walked up the driveway. "Hey, lady. We are on a tight schedule today. It is already 94 degrees out here, and my guys aren't standing around for free. That is $50 an hour per man for standby time starting now. You said you had the keys ready." "I have the keys," Evelyn shrieked, turning on him with a face distorted by rage. "The lock is just stuck. Just wait a minute." She turned back to the door and began rattling the handle with both hands, her floral hat slipping off her head and tumbling down the stairs. Chloe, the most impulsive of the 3, pushed her way to the front. "Move over. Mom, maybe it is voice-activated or something. Grace, open up," she yelled at the wood of the door. "Open the door, you brat," when the door remained motionless. Chloe's temper flared. She looked around the porch and spotted a heavy decorative river stone I had used as part of the minimalist landscaping near the entryway. She picked it up, a heavy 10-pound rock, and raised it over her head. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Is she really going to do what I think she's going to do?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just watched. Chloe lunged toward the large floor-to-ceiling window next to the entrance, swinging the stone with all her might. She expected the glass to shatter, expected to be able to reach inside and manually unlock the door. Instead, there was a dull, heavy thud that vibrated through the audio feed. The stone bounced off the surface of the glass and fell onto her foot, causing her to let out a howl of pain that echoed down the quiet street. She had no way of knowing that the windows were made of the same ballistic-grade polycarbonate I used for high-security data centers. It was designed to withstand a sledgehammer, let alone a garden rock. While Chloe hopped around on one foot, cursing at the top of her lungs, Brianna was frantically tapping at her phone, my own phone, sitting on the conference table, began to vibrate. It was the 14th call in 10 minutes from her. I didn't even look at it. I watched the screen as she held the phone to her ear, pacing back and forth on my lawn. "She is not picking up." Brianna screamed at my mother. "That selfish bitch is ignoring me. She is probably sitting in some spa in the Alps laughing at us. Mom, do something." Evelyn was beyond reason now. The embarrassment of failing in front of the movers and the neighbors was more than her ego could handle. I saw Mrs. Gable from across the street come out onto her porch, holding a watering can and staring at the circus unfolding at my house. My mother noticed her and immediately shifted into a performance. She began to wail, her voice rising in a theatrical, high-pitched lament that the microphone picked up with painful clarity. "Oh, help us. My own daughter has locked her mother out in the heat," Evelyn cried, waving her arms at the neighbors. "She promised us we could move in. She told us this was our family home, and now she has changed the locks, like we are criminals. She is a monster, a cold-hearted, ungrateful monster." She began kicking the bottom of the door, her expensive sandals scuffing the custom walnut finish I had waited 4 months for. Marcus looked at me. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of 34 years of their entitlement pressing against my chest. I reached out and tapped the icon on my laptop that activated the external intercom system. The speakers were hidden behind the architectural molding of the porch, designed to provide a crisp, immersive sound. I leaned toward the microphone on my laptop. My voice was calm, devoid of the shaking anger that usually accompanied my interactions with them. I spoke with the authority of someone who owned every square inch of the ground they were standing on. "Mom, stop kicking the door," I said. "You are going to ruin your shoes, and I really don't want to have to charge you for the repair of the finish." The effect was instantaneous. All 4 of them froze as if a bolt of lightning had struck the porch. They spun around, looking at the ceiling, the walls, and the cameras with wide, terrified eyes. The movers stepped back toward their trucks, sensing that the situation had just shifted into something far more dangerous than a simple lockout. Grace Evelyn whispered, looking directly into the camera lens above the door. "Grace, is that you? Open this door right now. Do you have any idea how hot it is out here? We have all our things in these trucks. You told us we could come. I never told you any such thing," I replied, my voice booming through the yard with icy precision. I watched the family chat. "Mom, I saw you divide up my bedrooms. I saw Brianna list my desk for sale. I saw Chloe eyeing my handbags. I am currently sitting in my lawyer's office in Los Angeles, and I am watching every single second of this pathetic performance in 4K resolution." Brianna stepped forward, trying to regain her composure. "Grace, stop being so dramatic. We are your sisters. We gave up our apartments for this. You can't just leave us on the sidewalk. It is illegal. We have rights. You have the right to remain silent." "Brianna," I said, a small, dark smile finally appearing on my face. "That is usually how the saying goes, isn't it? You are currently trespassing on private property. You used a stolen key to attempt entry into a residence that houses federally protected data servers." Evelyn began to scream again, her face turning a deep, mottled purple. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You owe me this house. You owe us everything. I will tell everyone what you are. I will ruin you. Welcome to my private property." "Mother," I said, ignoring her outburst, "take a good look at the door. It is the last time you will ever get that close to it. You have exactly 15 minutes to get those trucks out of my driveway and off my street before the police arrive to escort you away. The clock is ticking." I clicked the mute button and sat back. On the screen, the panic was no longer a slow burn. It was a full-blown forest fire. The movers were already climbing back into their cabs, refusing to be part of a criminal trespassing charge. My mother was slumped against the door, sobbing, while my sisters began to turn on each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of blame and regret. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding the remote, and I found that I quite liked the view. The air in Marcus's office was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, but on my monitor, the heat in Silver Lake was pushing 95. I could see the sweat stains beginning to bloom on my mother's floral silk dress as she leaned into the intercom, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal grief. She had stopped kicking the door. She realized that violence wasn't working, so she shifted to the only other weapon in her arsenal: guilt. "Grace, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Evelyn's voice crackled through the high-fidelity speakers in the conference room. It sounded thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming authority I had used moments ago. "We didn't mean any harm. Honey, we were just worried about this beautiful house sitting here all empty and lonely while you were halfway across the world. A big place like this needs life in it. We were just coming over to air it out, to make sure the pipes were running and the dust didn't settle. We were taking care of your investment. We are your family. Grace, we love you. Why are you treating us like we are some kind of common criminals?" I looked at Marcus. He was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, a look of pure professional boredom on his face. He had seen this play 1,000 times. I leaned into the microphone, my voice flat and devoid of the warmth she was fishing for. "You were taking care of it, Mom." "That is interesting," I said, my words echoing back to her on the porch, "because I am looking at the message you sent to the group chat at 3:42 in the morning last Tuesday. You told Brianna she could have the master suite because, and I quote, Grace is single and doesn't need all that space for herself. You also mentioned that I would be so happy to have company that I wouldn't mind sleeping on the sectional sofa in the den. Is that how you air out a house? By assigning my furniture to people who don't own it?" My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked over her shoulder at Brianna, who was frantically trying to hide her phone behind her back. The facade of the caring mother was cracking, but before she could pivot, my youngest sister, Savannah, stepped into the frame. Savannah was 24, the baby of the family, and the one who had spent the last 2 decades being shielded from the consequences of her own actions. She looked into the camera lens with wide, watery eyes, her bottom lip trembling. "Grace, please, stop this," Savannah sobbed, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch that probably carried 3 houses down the street. "How can you be so cruel? I didn't want to tell you like this. But I am pregnant. I am 12 weeks along. I have been having terrible morning sickness. And this heat is making me so dizzy, I feel like I'm going to faint. Are you really going to let your own sister and your future niece or nephew sleep on the curb? We have nowhere else to go. We already told our landlords we were leaving. If you don't let us in, you are putting a baby at risk. Do you really want that on your conscience?" The room went silent for a moment. Marcus raised an eyebrow at me. For a split second, a normal person might have felt a pang of doubt. But I wasn't a normal person when it came to Savannah. I was her sister, and I was the person who paid for her health insurance. That is a new low, even for you. "Savannah," I said, and I could hear the coldness in my own voice. It actually made me shiver. "But you forgot one very important detail. You stayed over at my place 3 weeks ago to use my high-speed internet for your streaming shows. You used my guest laptop to check your patient portal at the Cedars-Sinai Clinic, and you were too lazy to log out. I didn't see a pregnancy confirmation on your chart. I saw a negative HCG test and a prescription for some basic antibiotics for a sinus infection. You aren't pregnant. Savannah, you are just a liar who is desperate for a free room with a view." On the screen, Savannah's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She lunged at the camera lens, her hand clawing at the air as if she could reach through the digital void and strangle me. "You bitch," she shrieked. "You spied on me. That is a HIPAA violation. I'll sue you for everything you have. Actually, it is not a HIPAA violation when you leave your private information open on a third-party device that you don't own," Marcus chimed in, leaning toward the microphone with a predatory grin. "But it is fascinating to watch you commit fraud in real time." The foreman of the moving crew, a large man named Rick who had been standing by the truck with a growing look of disgust, finally reached his breaking point. He walked up to my mother and tapped her on the shoulder with his clipboard. "All right, lady, we are out," Rick said, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "We were hired for a standard residential move, not a family feud, and definitely not a criminal trespassing situation. My guys are not going to be part of some scam. Boys, start packing the ramps and close up the tailgates. We are leaving these crates right here on the sidewalk. You can find someone else to haul your junk." No, wait, Evelyn grabbed Rick's arm, her voice reaching a frantic, hysterical register. "You can't leave. We paid you a deposit, and you'll get the rest of the bill in the mail for the standby time." Rick snapped, shaking her hand off his sleeve. "We are done here." The sound of the heavy metal ramps sliding back into the trucks was like the closing of a coffin lid. My sisters began to panic. They watched as the professionals, the only people who could actually help them get their belongings inside, climbed back into their cabs. Brianna started screaming at the movers, while Chloe went back to the door, pounding on the walnut wood with her fists. "Open the door," Grace Chloe yelled. "You think you're so smart because you have a fancy job? You're still just our sister. You can't do this to us. The cops won't do a damn thing. I know the law. This is a civil matter between family members. They'll just tell us to work it out among ourselves. We aren't moving. We will sit on this porch until the sun goes down and the neighbors start complaining about the mess. You can't make us leave." I looked at the digital clock on my monitor. 12 minutes had passed since my last warning. I had 3 minutes left. "You're wrong, Chloe," I said, and the tone of my voice made her stop pounding. "You're very, very wrong. You think this is just a house. You think this is a domestic dispute about who gets the sunny bedroom, but you haven't been paying attention to my career for the last 10 years. This address is registered with the state of California and the federal government as a secure remote node for Vanguard Cybernetics." I paused for effect. Watching their faces, they looked confused, but a flicker of unease was starting to show in my mother's eyes. "There are proprietary encryption keys and secure hardware in the server room behind the library." I continued. By attempting to bypass the biometric security and by trying to force entry into this facility, you are not committing a simple trespass. You are in breach of a high-security data center. This is a felony. Chloe, it is covered under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and state-level corporate espionage laws. When the police arrive, they aren't going to ask for a birth certificate or a lease. They are going to see 4 individuals attempting to gain unauthorized access to a secure government-contracted facility. I could see the color draining from Chloe's face. She looked at the matte black scanner on the door, then back at the camera. They won't bring a social worker to mediate a family talk, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to fill the entire porch. They will bring zip ties, a warrant, and a lot of questions that you aren't smart enough to answer. You have exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds left before the alarm system triggers a high-priority dispatch to the LAPD's Specialized Response Unit. Grace, you're bluffing, Brianna stammered, but she was already backing away from the door toward her car. You wouldn't do that to your own mother. You wouldn't put us in jail. I have spent my entire life taking care of the 3 of you. I said, I have paid for your cars, your rent, your tuition, and even Savannah's fake doctor visits. I have been your safety net for 15 years, but today, the net is gone. I am not your sister right now. I am the owner of this property, and you are intruders. 1 minute and 40 seconds. The panic was no longer a slow burn. It was a wildfire. My mother looked at the trucks pulling away, then at the house she had thought she had successfully stolen. She looked at Mrs. Gable across the street, who was now joined by 2 other neighbors, all of them watching the scene with their phones out, recording every second of the meltdown. We have to go, Savannah shrieked, grabbing her purse and running toward the cars. I am not going to jail for a stupid room. Wait, my boxes, Chloe screamed, looking at the piles of luggage and furniture that the movers had left scattered across the sidewalk and my manicured lawn. Leave them, Brianna yelled, already gunning the engine of her SUV. Just get in the car. I watched as the 3 of them scrambled into their vehicles, tires screeching against the asphalt as they sped away from the curb. Only my mother remained, standing alone on the porch, her floral dress wilting in the heat, looking at the door that refused to acknowledge her existence. She looked broken, but I knew her too well. This wasn't heartbreak. It was the realization that she had finally pushed me too far. 60 seconds. Mom, I said quietly. Evelyn didn't say a word. She didn't look back at the cameras. She just turned around, picked up her fallen hat from the steps, and walked slowly toward her sedan. She climbed in and pulled away from the curb, just as the first faint sound of a siren began to wail in the distance. I sat back in the leather chair and let out a long, shaky breath. My hands were finally starting to tremble. Marcus reached over and tapped the screen, freezing the image of my empty, sun-drenched porch. Well, Grace, he said, standing up and straightening his tie. That was 98% more effective than a formal eviction notice. But don't get too comfortable. People like that don't just go away. They're like a bad line of code. They'll keep trying to find a way back in until you delete the entire file. I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the monitor. I know, I whispered, but for the first time in 34 years, they are the ones on the outside looking in. And I'm going to make sure it stays that way. The sirens were no longer a distant wail. They were a deafening, rhythmic scream that bounced off the modern glass facades of Silver Lake, signaling the end of the Lockridge family's delusions of grandeur. I watched the monitor in Marcus's office as 2 black and white patrol cars rounded the corner, their cherry-top lights splashing vibrant blues and reds across my pristine white perimeter wall. It was exactly 15 minutes since I had delivered my ultimatum. The timing was poetic. It was the precise amount of time it took for the reality of a felony charge to outweigh the greed of a free mansion. Officer Miller and Officer Vance stepped out of the first vehicle, their hands resting habitually on their utility belts as they took in the chaos. My mother's silver sedan was idling 10 feet from the curb, and my sister's cars were angled like they were preparing for a high-speed getaway that never quite started. The sidewalk was an eyesore of abandoned crates, open suitcases, and a velvet armchair that Brianna had clearly insisted on bringing despite having nowhere to put it. I tapped an icon on my tablet and opened a direct, encrypted channel to the lead officer's mobile terminal. "Officer Miller, this is Grace Lockridge, the homeowner," I said through the external speaker system. "I have just sent a secure link to your unit. It contains high-definition footage from the last hour, including the attempted forced entry using a fraudulent key and the intentional attempt to shatter the ballistic glass on the west-facing windows. You will see Evelyn Lockridge and Chloe Lockridge as the primary actors in these attempts." I watched Miller look up at the camera lens above my door. A brief nod of acknowledgement showing he understood the level of surveillance he was dealing with. He checked his tablet, his eyes widening slightly as he watched the replay of my mother stabbing at the biometric scanner with her useless brass key and Chloe swinging a 10-pound Riverstone at my window. The evidence was undeniable. It wasn't just a family argument, it was a documented crime. The officers didn't waste time. They approached the vehicles, signaling for my mother and sisters to step out. The scene that unfolded next was the definition of grim reality. The polished, sun-drenched dream of a Silver Lake lifestyle was replaced by the harsh, unyielding light of a police investigation. "You need to clear this area immediately," Officer Miller shouted, his voice carrying over the sound of the idling engines. "This is private property, and the owner has provided evidence of attempted forced entry and vandalism. If these vehicles and this property are not moved in the next 10 minutes, we are moving from a trespass warning to an immediate custodial arrest for everyone present." The panic that followed was a masterclass in cowardice. My sisters, who only an hour ago were picking out silk wallpapers and debating which wine to steal next, turned on each other with the ferocity of caged animals. "This is all your fault," Brianna screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my mother. "You told us she was in the middle of the Swiss Alps. You said she had no idea. You swore the key worked. I gave up my apartment for this." "Mom, I have $6,500 in furniture sitting on a dirty sidewalk and nowhere to go because you lied to us. I am not going to jail for you," Evelyn, Chloe shrieked, shoving a pile of her designer shoeboxes back into her hatchback with a frantic, desperate energy. "You're the one who made the key. You're the one who told us Grace owed us this. I'm leaving." The sisters began a frantic scramble to reclaim their belongings from the crates the movers had left behind. It was a pathetic, ugly sight. Brianna was trying to shove a floor-length mirror into the back of her SUV, while Savannah sat on the curb, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. Though I noticed she was careful not to smudge her expensive mascara. They were no longer a family. They were 4 individuals trying to minimize their own personal losses at the expense of everyone else. My mother, however, couldn't let the performance end. She approached Officer Miller, her eyes brimming with calculated tears. "Officer, you don't understand," she started, her voice trembling. "I am her mother. She invited us here. This is just a misunderstanding between a parent and a child who has become blinded by her own wealth. We just wanted to be together." Officer Miller didn't even look up from his notepad. "Ma'am, I have seen the video of you trying to jemmy a high-security lock and screaming curses at a doorbell camera. That doesn't look like a family reunion to me. It looks like a breach. If you don't stop disturbing the peace and move your car, I will cite you for disorderly conduct on top of the trespassing charge. This is your final warning." I turned to Marcus. "Get the team on the ground," I said. "I want a full forensic audit of the exterior." Marcus nodded and picked up his phone. Within minutes, a silver van pulled up behind the police cars. These were the investigators Marcus used for civil litigation. They stepped out with high-resolution cameras and measuring tapes, beginning to document the scuff marks on the walnut door and the microfractures in the window frame where Chloe's rock had struck. "I want every scratch billed back to them." I told Marcus, "I want a line-item invoice for the restoration of the finish, the recalibration of the biometric sensors, and the psychological distress of having my private sanctuary violated. We are building a paper trail that will bury them." By the time the clock hit the 10-minute mark, my sisters had fled. They drove off in different directions. leaving behind a scattering of trash and a few heavy boxes they couldn't fit into their cars. Only my mother remained, sitting in her idling sedan, watching the forensic team photograph the door she had tried to steal. She looked small, but I knew the venom was still there. She eventually pulled away, her tires spitting gravel against my driveway. "Marcus, find out where they went," I said. It didn't take long. Juliana, my cousin, sent me a text 20 minutes later with a GPS pin. "They are at the Old Gate storage facility in Van Nuys." She wrote, "My mother's cousin, Larry, owns it. It is a dilapidated warehouse with no air conditioning and a serious rodent problem. They are currently unloading their furniture into a 10 by 20 unit. They're planning to sleep on air mattresses in the back office because they have literally nowhere else to go. They burned their leases. Grace, they really thought they were moving into your place today." The thought of my mother, who insisted on silk sheets and imported sparkling water, sleeping in a dusty warehouse in the middle of a Los Angeles heatwave, should have made me feel something like pity. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief. The boundary had been set in stone. But the real blow came an hour later. Marcus walked back into the conference room, his face grimmer than usual. He dropped a thick folder on the table. "Grace, we were doing a sweep of the local county recorder's office and checking for any recent filings against your property. We found something you need to see." I opened the folder. My breath hitched. It was a quitclaim deed, drafted 3 weeks ago. It purported to transfer 50% of the ownership of the Silver Lake property from me to Evelyn Lockridge. At the bottom was a signature that looked terrifyingly like my own, along with a notary stamp from a small, shady business in a strip mall in Glendale. "She didn't just want a bedroom." "Grace," Marcus said, his voice low, "she was trying to steal the title. She filed this electronically while you were in Tennessee. She probably figured that if she could get into the house and establish residency, she could use this forged document to tie you up in court for years. By the time the forgery was proven, she would have lived in that house for free for half a decade." I stared at the forged signature. It was a calculated, cold-blooded attempt to erase my ownership of my own life. This wasn't just greed. This was an assassination of my autonomy. "Can we prove it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The notary they used has already been under investigation for fraud. And more importantly, the electronic filing was done from an IP address that matches the Wi-Fi at your mother's old apartment. She used her own laptop to steal your house. I closed the folder and looked back at the monitor. The sun was starting to set over Silver Lake, casting long golden shadows across my empty porch. They were sitting in a warehouse in Van Nuys, thinking they were just waiting for me to calm down. They had no idea that I had just moved from defense to offense. "Marcus," I said, standing up, "I want you to file a criminal complaint for felony forgery and identity theft by the time the courts open tomorrow morning. And I want a civil suit for $1 million in punitive damages. If they want to play with deeds and titles, we are going to give them a lesson in property law that will leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs." I walked to the window of the office, looking out at the city lights. My family thought they had found a weakness in my fortress. They thought that because they shared my blood, they shared my life. But as I watched the red lights of the police cars fade into the distance on the screen, I knew that the Lockridge family was dead to me. I wasn't just protecting a house anymore. I was cauterizing a wound that had been bleeding for 34 years, and I wasn't going to stop until the fire had consumed everything they had ever tried to take from me. The digital battlefield is often far more treacherous than the physical one, because while a door can be reinforced with steel, a reputation can be dismantled with a single, well-timed lie. By Tuesday evening, the Lockridge family had transitioned from physical invaders to digital snipers, from the sterile comfort of my hotel suite. I watched as my phone screen transformed into a waterfall of venom. They had clearly spent their first night in that dusty Van Nuys warehouse coordinating a script. Brianna was the first to strike. She posted a selfie on Instagram that was a masterclass in manipulation. Her makeup was washed off. Her eyes were artificially reddened with what I suspected was onion juice, and she was huddled under a thin gray blanket in the corner of a dark room. The caption was a knife to the heart. My sisters and I are sleeping in a storage unit tonight. Our own sister, Grace, had us evicted by armed police from the house she promised would be our family home. Success has changed her. She would rather have empty rooms and server racks than a family that loves her. Please pray for us. Within 2 hours, the post had garnered over 4,000 likes and hundreds of comments. Most of them were from people who didn't know a server from a toaster, calling me an ungrateful monster and a cold-blooded sociopath. But they didn't stop there. My mother, Evelyn, took to Facebook to dig up ghosts. She posted grainy photos of me from 10 years ago, back when I was working 3 jobs and living on ramen noodles to pay for my first certifications. She wrote long, rambling posts suggesting that my sudden rise at Vanguard Cybernetics wasn't due to my talent or 18-hour workdays, but through illicit back-channel deals and corporate espionage. She hinted that the reason my house was so heavily fortified was to hide evidence of my dirty money. By Wednesday morning, the social media wildfire had reached my inner circle. My phone began to vibrate with calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Sarah called to tell me I was a disgrace to the Lockridge name. Uncle Pete left a voicemail saying that no amount of money was worth more than a mother's tears. Even my neighbors in Silver Lake, the ones who had watched the drama from their porches, started posting on Nextdoor about the arrogant tech woman who called the cops on her own flesh and blood. One person even suggested a 90% drop in property values because of the toxic energy I was bringing to the street. The pressure reached a breaking point when I was called into a private meeting at the headquarters of Vanguard Cybernetics. I sat across from the Director of Human Resources and the Chief Security Officer. Our company was currently bidding on a $500 million contract with the Department of Defense, and they were hypersensitive to anything that looked like a character flaw. "Grace, we know your work is flawless," the director said, leaning over a mahogany desk. "But these allegations on social media about illicit dealings and family instability are creating a noise we cannot ignore. The military looks at a person's personal life as a metric for their security clearance. If you can't manage a house, they wonder if you can manage a national firewall. You have 48 hours to get this under control, or we may have to put you on administrative leave." I walked out of that office feeling like the walls were closing in. But I didn't panic. In my world, when a system is under attack, the first rule is to let the hacker reveal their full hand. I didn't issue a statement. I didn't argue with Aunt Sarah. I stayed silent, watching as the Lockridge family grew bolder and more arrogant with every share and every sympathetic comment. I knew they were digging a hole so deep they would never be able to climb out. What they didn't know was that I had an inside source. Juliana, the only one with a conscience, had been tasked by my mother to keep an eye on the group chat and help coordinate the posts. On Thursday night, she met me in the basement of a quiet coffee shop in Burbank. She handed me a digital recorder. They had a meeting in the back office of that warehouse last night. Juliana whispered, her hands shaking as she sipped her tea. "They think they have you cornered. They aren't just trying to ruin you anymore. Grace, they want a payout." I played the recording. The audio was slightly muffled by the sound of a distant freight train, but the voices were unmistakable. I heard my mother's sharp, commanding tone. "We have her on the ropes," Evelyn said. "The company is breathing down her neck. Brianna, keep the posts coming. Mention the baby again, even if Savannah has to fake a fainting spell on camera. We wait until Saturday morning. Then we send the demand. $500,000 in a non-disclosure settlement. Or we take the story to the local news stations. She'll pay it just to save her career. We split it 4 ways, and we get our own places." My stomach turned as I heard Chloe chime in. "Why stop at 500,000? She's worth millions. We should squeeze her for a cool $1 million. I already have the letter ready. I'll send it from an encrypted email so she can't prove it's us. It'll look like an anonymous whistleblower is threatening to expose her secret servers." I thanked Juliana and watched her slip away into the night. I went back to my hotel and waited, like clockwork. At 2:15 on Friday morning, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line was, "Your secrets for a price." It was sent from a Proton Mail account, a service known for its encryption. but the person sending it was an amateur. The letter was a classic extortion attempt. It claimed that the sender had evidence of my illegal data harvesting and that if I didn't transfer $500,000 in Bitcoin to a specific wallet by Sunday night, they would release the full story to the press and the Department of Defense. I didn't need a private investigator. I am the investigator. I pulled the header information from the email and tracked the metadata. While the email service was secure, the person sending it had logged into a public Wi-Fi network at a 24-hour diner just 2 blocks away from the storage facility in Van Nuys. I cross-referenced the MAC address of the device used to send the email with the logs from my home network from 3 weeks ago when Chloe had stayed over to use my high-speed internet. It was a 100% match. My own sister had sent a federal-level extortion threat from her personal tablet while eating a stack of pancakes. The pieces were all in place. They thought they were the ones conducting a symphony, but I was the one who had written the score. On Saturday morning, Brianna posted her most ambitious piece of theater yet. It was a video titled The Cold Truth, where she walked through the dusty warehouse, showing the air mattresses and the boxes, crying about how I had stolen their dignity. She tagged every major news outlet in Los Angeles. The comments were reaching a fever pitch of hatred toward me. That was the moment I hit the upload button. I didn't post a long explanation. I didn't beg for forgiveness. I simply went to the comments section of Brianna's video and my mother's Facebook page and dropped a link to a private website I had hosted on a secure server. The title of the page was The Lockridge Files, The Reality of the Silver Lake Breach. When people clicked the link, they weren't met with text. They were met with a high-definition, 3-part video series. The first video was the 4K footage of the Monday morning break-in. It showed the 4 of them laughing while they tried to jemmy my door with a stolen key. It showed Chloe swinging a massive rock at my window with a face full of malice. Not desperation. It showed them drinking my $5,000 wine and joking about how they were going to kick me to the sofa. The second video was a screen recording of the family group chat, scrolling through their months of planning, showing exactly how they had intended to forge the deed and occupy the house while I was away. It showed Brianna's listings for my furniture and Chloe's plans to sell my handbags. The final audio file was the one that truly shattered them. It was the recording Juliana had made, where my mother and sisters laughed about extorting me for $500,000. I followed it with a technical breakdown proving the blackmail email came from Chloe's specific device. The silence that followed on social media was deafening. It was as if the entire city of Los Angeles had collectively gasped. Within 30 minutes, the tide didn't just turn, it became a tsunami that swept the Lockridge family away. The same people who had been calling me a monster were now tagging the LAPD and the FBI in the comments. The sympathetic relatives went quiet, or worse, started attacking Brianna for lying to them. By Saturday afternoon, Brianna had deleted her Instagram account. Chloe's Facebook was flooded with people calling her a felon. My mother tried to post a retraction, claiming it was all a joke, but nobody was buying it. The cancel culture they had tried to weaponize against me had turned its sights on them, and it was far more ruthless than anything they had imagined. I received a call from the director of HR at Vanguard Cybernetics at 4 o'clock. "Grace, we've seen the evidence," he said, his voice sounding relieved. "It's everywhere. We've already briefed the Department of Defense. Your security clearance is not only safe, but they were actually impressed with how you handled the counterintelligence. We'll see you back in the office on Monday." I closed my laptop and looked out at the city. The digital war was over, but the legal one was just beginning. I had successfully defended my castle and my character. But as I looked at the photos of my sisters cowering in that warehouse, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the fighting. It was the realization that I had finally, permanently, deleted the people I once called family from my life. I had won, but the victory tasted like the cold Swiss air I had left behind, sharp, lonely, and final. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," I said, "I have the extortion metadata and the recordings. I want the police at that warehouse by sunset. If they wanted to play games with my life, it's time they learned that in the real world. Every action has a log, and every crime has a consequence. And for the Lockridges, the bill has just come due. The transition from the court of public opinion to a court of law is a shift from noise to silence, from chaotic emotion to the cold, dry friction of paperwork. By the following Monday morning, Marcus Thorne had finalized a civil complaint that read like a death warrant for the Lockridge family's financial future. We weren't just seeking an apology, we were seeking a total accounting. I sat in his office as he hit the final transmit button to the Los Angeles County Superior Court, officially filing a lawsuit against Evelyn, Brianna, Chloe, and Savannah Lockridge for trespass, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted conversion of property, and defamation with malice. Marcus looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Grace, this is what we call a full court press," he said. "Most people in your position would settle for a restraining order and a quiet life. But because your mother filed that forged quitclaim deed, she crossed a line that turns this into a predatory litigation case. We are asking for $2 million in compensatory and punitive damages. We are also filing for a preliminary injunction to prevent them from coming within 500 meters of you or the Silver Lake property." I nodded, feeling a strange lack of emotion. I was no longer the daughter who felt guilty for her success. I was a plaintiff. The process was now a machine that I had set in motion, and I had no intention of stopping it until it had crushed the last of their entitlement. 2 days later, the first hearing took place. My mother had managed to scrape together a few $1,000s, likely by pawning the jewelry I had bought her for her 60th birthday, to hire a man named Gerald Halloway. He was a bottom-tier attorney who operated out of a strip mall and smelled faintly of cheap cigars. He stood before the judge and tried to spin a tale of familial misunderstanding. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a wealthy daughter overreacting to a minor domestic dispute," Halloway argued, waving a trembling hand toward my mother, who was dressed in her most pitiable black outfit. "Mrs. Lockridge believed she had a verbal agreement to enter the home. This is a family matter that should be handled in counseling, not in a courtroom. These women are currently homeless because the plaintiff chose to involve the police in a simple misunderstanding over a bedroom." Marcus didn't even stand up to deliver his rebuttal. He simply handed a tablet to the court clerk. "Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit A through D," Marcus said calmly. "This includes a forensic analysis of a forged quitclaim deed filed by the defendant, Evelyn Lockridge, 3 weeks ago. We also have recorded audio of the defendants discussing a $500,000 extortion plot against my client. This is not a domestic dispute. This is a criminal enterprise." The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had clearly seen enough fraud cases to last 10 lifetimes, spent 5 minutes reviewing the digital files. She looked at my mother with a coldness that mirrored my own. I saw Evelyn wither under that gaze. The judge didn't just grant the injunction, she issued a scathing rebuke. "The court finds a substantial likelihood of success on the merits for the plaintiff," the judge announced. "I am issuing a temporary restraining order effective immediately. The defendants are to remain at least 500 meters away from Grace Lockridge and the Silver Lake address. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of the forged deed to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into identity theft and filing false documents." As we walked out of the courtroom, the reality of their situation began to set in. They weren't just losing the house, they were losing their freedom to move. The 500-meter bubble meant they couldn't even drive through my neighborhood to get to the freeway. But the legal blow was only the beginning of their downward spiral. Financial gravity is a merciless force once it takes hold. The contract they had signed with Pacific Relocation for the botched move turned out to have a clause that triggered massive penalties for abandoned services, because they had no place to put their belongings. Their furniture remained in a climate-controlled storage facility that was charging them $150 a day in emergency holding fees. By the end of the first week, they owed the moving company nearly $4,000. Then came the professional fallout. Brianna had managed to maintain a mid-level administrative job at a regional bank for almost 6 months. But banks are incredibly sensitive to employees who are publicly outed for attempted fraud and extortion. On Thursday afternoon, Juliana sent me a screenshot of a LinkedIn update. Brianna had been escorted out of her office by security after the bank's compliance department saw the viral videos of her trying to sell my furniture. She was now unemployed, with a ruined reputation and a $5,000 per month lifestyle she could no longer afford. The warehouse in Van Nuys, which they had initially seen as a temporary staging area, became a pressure cooker. The heat in the San Fernando Valley was reaching 98 degrees daily, and the Old Gate storage facility had no ventilation. Juliana told me the fights had become legendary. The three sisters were blaming my mother for the forged deed, and my mother was blaming them for being too stupid to get past the locks. The first crack in their alliance appeared on Friday night. My phone rang, and despite the restraining order, I saw Savannah's number. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail appeared. Her voice was frantic, stripped of the fake pregnancy sweetness she had used on the porch. "Grace, please, listen to me." Savannah sobbed into the recording. "It was all Mom. She's the one who made the key. She's the one who told us you wouldn't care. She's the one who signed your name on that paper. I didn't know it was a forgery. I swear, if you just drop the suit against me, I will testify against her. I will tell the court everything she did. I have emails. Grace, I have proof that she planned this whole thing. Please, don't ruin my life because of her greed. I'm your baby sister. You used to love me." I played the message for Marcus the next morning. He looked at me, waiting for a reaction. "Do you want to offer her a deal?" he asked. "If she flips, we can nail Evelyn for the felony forgery much faster." I looked out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, thinking about all the times I had bailed Savannah out of trouble. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had spent on her car repairs, her dental work, and her rent, only for her to plot my downfall the moment I turned my back. "No," I said, the word feeling heavy and final. "No deals." A few hours later, I was leaving Marcus's office when I saw the four of them standing near the courthouse steps, presumably waiting for their budget lawyer. They saw me and stopped. The restraining order was in effect, but we were in a public legal corridor. My mother stepped forward, her face a mask of desperation. "Grace, stop this madness," Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "You've had your fun. You've embarrassed us. You've made your point. But now Brianna has no job, and we are living in a furnace. Is this what you want? To see your own mother on the street? We are your family." I stopped and looked at her. I didn't feel the old familiar tug of guilt. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I looked at Brianna, who was glaring at me with pure hatred, and at Chloe, who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Finally, I looked at Savannah, who was still trying to catch my eye, hoping for the mercy she had begged for in her voicemail. "Family," I said, my voice low but perfectly clear. Family doesn't copy keys in secret while their sister's in the shower. Family doesn't divide up rooms in a house they didn't pay for. And family certainly doesn't forge a signature to steal a $4 million property title. "Grace, please," my mother started, her hand reaching out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back, maintaining the legal distance. "You stopped being my family the second you touched that lock." I said, "You didn't see me as a person. You saw me as an asset to be liquidated. You thought my success belonged to you because you couldn't achieve your own. Well, now you can own the consequences." I turned to Marcus, who was standing a few feet away with a security guard. "I would like to go now." "Marcus," as we walked toward the parking garage. I could hear Brianna start to scream at Savannah, accusing her of being a traitor for trying to call me. The sisterhood was dissolving into a mess of litigation and poverty, and for the first time in 34 years, I wasn't the one reaching into my pocket to fix it. I got into my car and drove back to my hotel. I still wasn't ready to go back to the Silver Lake house. The air there still felt tainted by their presence, by the memory of them standing on my porch like conquerors. But as I watched the city lights blink on, I realized that the legal war was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was erecting a barrier that no amount of guilt or manipulation could penetrate. I looked at the latest update from the forensic team. They had found evidence of 2 more forged documents in my mother's old apartment, a life insurance policy amendment, and a power of attorney form she hadn't had the chance to file yet. She had been planning a total takeover of my existence. I closed my laptop and felt a cold, sharp sense of peace. The Lockridge family had wanted my life, but all they were going to get was a mountain of debt, a criminal record, and the bitter realization that the woman they tried to destroy was the only thing that had been keeping them afloat. The bridge was not just burned, it was vaporized, and as I looked at the dark silhouette of the mountains in the distance, I knew I would never look back. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a storm, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, expectant quiet of a graveyard. I was sitting on the floor of my hotel suite, surrounded by 4 cardboard boxes that Marcus's team had salvaged from the curb of my mother's old apartment after she was evicted. The landlord had been more than happy to hand them over to my legal team once he realized who I was. I hadn't intended to go through them. I had planned to have them incinerated. But curiosity is a persistent ghost, and as I pulled the packing tape off the first box, I didn't realize I was about to exhume the remains of my entire childhood. Inside the third box, buried under layers of moth-eaten sweaters and old receipts, I found a faded manila envelope. It was labeled Grace Silk College in my mother's elegant, loopy handwriting. I opened it, expecting to see old report cards or perhaps a graduation photo. Instead, I found a stack of bank statements from 2009, the year I started my undergraduate degree. My breath hitched. I remembered that year vividly. I was working 40 hours a week at a 24-hour diner while taking 18 credits, often sleeping in the library because I couldn't afford the gas to drive back to the cramped apartment we shared. I had won a prestigious private scholarship, the Merit Excellence Award, worth $25,000 a year. But my mother had told me there was a clerical error. She told me the foundation had gone bankrupt and the money never materialized. I believed her. I spent 4 years in a state of constant, grinding exhaustion, thinking I was just unlucky. But the statements in my hand told a different story. The $25,000 had been deposited like clockwork every August into a joint account my mother had forced me to open when I turned 18. And every September, like clockwork, that money had been wired out, not to a school, but to various retailers: Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, and a local plastic surgery center where Evelyn had her first refresh. She hadn't just lied to me, she had effectively stolen my youth, forcing me into a life of indentured labor while she and my sisters lived off the sweat of my brow before I even had a career. I kept digging, the rage in my chest turning into a cold, hard stone. At the very bottom of the box was a legal document from 2012, the year my father passed away. He had died in a car accident, and I was told his insurance policy was barely enough to cover the funeral. But there it was, a payout summary from the insurance provider. $500,000. I sat back on my heels, the room spinning. I remembered Evelyn telling me that Dad had died in debt. I remembered feeling guilty for asking if there was any money left for my master's degree. Meanwhile, that same year, Brianna and Chloe had suddenly moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in West Hollywood. They told me they had invested wisely with their part-time waitress tips. They had lied, all of them. My father had left a legacy meant to secure my future, and my mother had funneled it into my sister's vanity projects and a home I was never invited to stay in. I realized then that I was never a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was the cash cow they had been grooming since I was a teenager. They didn't love Grace Lockridge. They loved the percentage of my paycheck they could extract through guilt and manipulation. Every birthday gift, every emergency rent payment I had covered for them over the last decade, it wasn't family helping family. It was a victim paying back the people who had been robbing her in the dark for 20 years. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. It was nearly 11 at night, but I knew he would be up. Marcus. I found the paper trail, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. I want a full forensic accounting of every dollar I have sent to my mother and sisters since 2014, every Venmo, every bank wire, every loan for a car repair or a medical bill that never happened. Marcus sounded intrigued. You're going for a clawback, I'm going for everything, I replied. I have proof of embezzlement from my scholarship fund and the concealment of my father's insurance payout. I want to file a separate suit for the return of all funds obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation. If they claimed they needed money for rent while they were actually buying designer bags. I want it back, with interest. According to my preliminary spreadsheet, the total was staggering. Over the last 10 years, I had lent them more than $275,000. Money I had earned during those 14-hour shifts at Vanguard. Money I had saved while living in a tiny studio so I could eventually buy my dream home. I was going to strip them of every cent they had ever bled from me. While I was building my legal guillotine, the Lockridge family was experiencing the reality of the poverty they had so often faked to get my money. Juliana, my cousin, kept me updated with a mix of pity and dark humor. They were staying at the Sunset Strip Motel, a place that charged $65 a night and was notorious for being a haven for drug deals and transient workers. There was no room service, no silk sheets, and the air conditioning unit in their single shared room was held together by duct tape and prayers. The pressure of the impending lawsuits and the loss of their social standing had pushed Chloe over the edge. Chloe had always been the one with the most expensive tastes and the least amount of self-control. To maintain the illusion of her influencer lifestyle on social media, she had apparently borrowed $40,000 from a private lender in Glendale, the kind of people who don't care about credit scores because they prefer to collect in flesh and fear. With the restraining order preventing her from contacting me and the bank accounts frozen by the preliminary injunction Marcus had secured, Chloe had no way to make her payments. The interest on those loans was a staggering 15% a week. She was drowning, and the rest of the family was being pulled down with her. They were fighting over the last few dollars in my mother's purse just to buy lukewarm coffee and fast food. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I had a meeting that changed the nature of my revenge. I was at a high-end steakhouse in Beverly Hills with Julian Mercer, the CEO of a major defense contracting firm and one of my most powerful business partners. Julian was a man who moved in circles where $1 billion was considered a rounding error. He had seen the news, of course, in L.A. Everyone had seen the news. "Grace," he said, cutting into a steak that probably cost more than my mother's weekly motel bill, "I've been following your little family situation. It's messy, and I hate it when my best architects are distracted by mess. I'm handling it." "Julian," I said, my tone professional and sharp, "I know you are. But I thought I'd give you a little housewarming gift," he said, sliding a thick blue folder across the table. "I heard your sister Chloe was in a bit of a bind with some predatory lenders in Glendale, and I heard your mother's motel bill was being handled by a third-party collection agency. My holding company went ahead and bought up all their private debt, the loan shark's paper, the moving company's penalties, even the back taxes your mother owes the state from her failed boutique." I stared at the folder. My heart was pounding. "Why?" "Because I like you, Grace, and because now, technically, you work for me, and they work for you. I've transferred the ownership of those debts to a subsidiary of Lockridge Defense Systems. Your mother and sisters no longer owe money to the bank or some thug in a tracksuit. They owe it to you. Every penny of that $400,000 in combined debt is now under your direct control." I opened the folder and saw the signatures. Julian had effectively handed me the leash to their lives. I didn't just have the house back. I had the legal right to garnish their future wages, to seize any assets they managed to scrap together, and to dictate the terms of their financial existence for the next 30 years. I felt a rush of power that was almost intoxicating. For 34 years, I had been the one dancing to their tune, terrified of their disapproval, desperate for a crumb of their affection. Now, the roles were reversed. I held the power of financial life and death over them. I didn't call them to gloat. I didn't send a mocking text. I simply had Marcus send a formal notice of debt acquisition to the Sunset Strip Motel. I wanted them to know, while they were sitting on those stained mattresses in the sweltering heat, that the woman they tried to sleep on her own sofa was now their landlord, their lender, and their judge. I walked out of the restaurant and into the bright California sun. I felt lighter than I had in decades. The secrets of the past, the stolen scholarship, the hidden insurance no longer had the power to hurt me. They were just more evidence, more ammunition. As I drove toward Silver Lake, I passed a billboard for a luxury watch brand. I thought about Chloe, probably checking her phone every 5 minutes to see if her follower count had dropped further. I thought about Brianna, trying to figure out how to explain her termination to her next employer. And I thought about Evelyn, the woman who had sold her daughter's future for a designer handbag and a facelift. They had wanted a room in my house. Well, they had one now, a cramped, hot room in a cheap motel, with a mountain of debt that would ensure they never saw the inside of a luxury villa again. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel to the beat of the radio. The fortress was secure. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just safe. I was the one in control of the perimeter. And as I looked at the digital display on my dashboard, I saw a message from the security team at the house, all systems green. I smiled. The game wasn't just on, it was almost over. And I was the only one who knew the final score. I would give them 1 week to sit with the news of their debt. 1 week to realize that every time they spent $1 on a burger or a bus pass, they were technically spending my money. Then, I would bring the hammer down. I had the power to forgive the debt, or I had the power to ruin them. And after what I had found in those cardboard boxes, I knew exactly which path I was going to take. There would be no mercy for the people who had spent a lifetime treating my soul like a revolving credit line. The bill was due, and I was here to collect. The wood-paneled walls of courtroom 4B felt like they were closing in, but for once, I wasn't the one suffocating. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the air in the room was thick with the scent of floor wax and the low-level hum of high-stakes anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my spine perfectly straight, wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than my mother's current net worth. Marcus Thorne was to my left, leaning back in his chair with the predatory grace of a shark waiting for the first drop of blood. Across the aisle, the Lockridge women were a sight of absolute, unmitigated ruin. They were dressed in what they clearly thought were poverty-chic outfits, faded cardigans and scuffed flats, trying to look like a family of orphans rather than the high-end looters they actually were. Judge Miriam Vance entered the room, and the bailiff called the court to order. I could see the sweat on my mother's upper lip from 6 feet away. Evelyn Lockridge had spent the last week trying to call my office, my lawyer, and even Juliana, begging for a settlement. But I had gone completely dark. The only thing she had received from me was a formal subpoena, just as the judge began to read the introductory remarks. My mother suddenly let out a sharp, choked gasp. She clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back into her head as she slid slowly from her chair onto the linoleum floor. Brianna and Savannah let out perfectly timed, high-pitched shrieks of "Mom" and "Someone help her." It was a performance that might have worked in a 19th century melodrama, but in a 21st century Los Angeles courtroom, it was pathetic. Judge Vance didn't even flinch. She had likely seen this exact tactic 100 times from defendants facing the reality of their own greed. She looked over her glasses at the bailiff. "Call the court medic from the hallway," she said, her voice dry as parchment. "We will pause for 5 minutes. A specialized medical examiner, who was already on standby due to Marcus's foresight, stepped into the room. He didn't offer a pillow or a glass of water. He knelt down, checked my mother's pulse, shone a light into her eyes, and took a quick blood pressure reading with a portable cuff. My mother continued to lie there, her breathing ragged and theatrical. After 90 seconds, the doctor stood up and looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant's vitals are remarkably stable," the doctor announced. "Her blood pressure is 120/80. Her heart rate is 72 beats per minute, and her pupils are reactive. There is no sign of syncope or cardiac distress. She is simply holding her breath and refusing to open her eyes." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as my mother's eyelids flickered. Judge Vance's expression went from neutral to icy. "Get up, Mrs. Lockridge," the judge commanded. "If you are not in that chair in the next 10 seconds, I will have you held in contempt, and you will spend the remainder of this trial in a holding cell." Evelyn, miraculously, recovered. She scrambled back into her seat, her face flushed with a deep, mottled purple of pure humiliation. The trial proceeded, and the atmosphere shifted from theatrical to cannibalistic. Marcus began the evidence presentation, laying out the timeline of the Silver Lake breach. He showed the biometric logs, the forged quitclaim deed, and the audio recordings of their extortion plot, but the real destruction began when it was time for the defendants to testify. Without a shred of loyalty, the Lockridge sisters began to tear each other apart to save their own skin. Brianna was the first to flip. She stood at the witness stand, her voice trembling as she pointed a finger directly at our mother. "I was coerced," she claimed, her eyes darting around the room. "My mother told me Grace had already agreed to the move. She said the deed was legal and that Grace was just being difficult. I only listed the furniture for sale because Mom said we needed the cash for the security deposit on a new place. I'm a victim here too. I lost my job because of her schemes." Chloe was next, and she was even more vicious. She testified that the $500,000 extortion email was actually Brianna's idea, and that Savannah had been the one to provide the fake medical history for the pregnancy lie. "It was Mom who made us do it," Chloe sobbed, wiping away tears that didn't exist. "She's obsessed with Grace's money. She told us we deserved a piece of it. I never wanted to hurt my sister. I just wanted a place to live." Savannah, the youngest, didn't even try to defend them. She offered to provide her phone's full message history in exchange for being removed from the damages portion of the suit. She detailed how Evelyn had spent hours practicing her signature to match mine for the forgery. They were like rats in a flooded basement, climbing over each other just to keep their heads above water. I watched from my table, feeling a cold, clinical sense of detachment. These were the women who had shared my dinner table for 30 years, and they were ready to send each other to prison for a chance at a lighter sentence. Judge Vance had heard enough. She didn't even retire to her chambers to deliberate. She began delivering the verdict with the rhythmic finality of a hammer hitting a nail. The evidence of premeditated fraud, trespass, and malicious defamation is overwhelming. The judge stated, "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Grace Lockridge, on all counts. I am awarding compensatory and punitive damages in the amount of $300,000 to be paid jointly and severally by the defendants. Furthermore, the court orders the immediate permanent injunction against all defendants, but the legal victory was only the beginning of their nightmare. Because they had zero liquid assets and the warehouse in Van Nuys was already behind on its rent. The court moved to the asset seizure phase. We didn't even have to wait for a separate hearing. Marcus had already secured the sheriff's deputies to oversee the collection of property to satisfy the judgment. An hour later, we stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. It was a brutal, public display of their downfall. A flatbed tow truck pulled up to the curb, its heavy metal chains clanking in the afternoon air. The sheriff's deputies began loading the few remaining luxury items they owned. They took Brianna's SUV, the one she had used to flaunt her fake wealth for years. They took the designer handbags Chloe had tried to hide in the trunk of her car. The most symbolic moment, however, was when the deputies approached my mother's sedan. It was the only vehicle they had left, and it was currently filled with their clothes and basic belongings. My mother stood on the sidewalk, clutching her wilted floral hat, her face contorted in a mask of absolute horror as the heavy-duty hook was attached to the front axle of the car. She watched as her last shred of dignity was lifted into the air and secured onto the back of the truck. "Wait! You can't," Evelyn shrieked. Running toward the deputy, "Everything we own is in that car. Where are we supposed to go?" The deputy didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, this property is being seized to satisfy a court-ordered judgment. You have 10 minutes to remove any essential medication or legal documents. Everything else goes to the auction house." They were left standing on the hot asphalt of downtown Los Angeles with nothing but a few plastic trash bags filled with their clothes. My sisters were huddled together, their faces pale and drawn, the reality of their poverty finally sinking in. They were no longer the Lockridges of Silver Lake. They were 3 unemployed women with a massive debt and no roof over their heads. In a final, desperate move, they approached me as I walked toward my own car. They didn't come with anger this time. They came with the groveling, sickening humility of people who have run out of options. "Grace, please," Brianna whispered, her voice cracking. "We're sorry. We know we messed up, but we have nowhere to go. The warehouse is locked. We have $42 between the four of us. Just let us stay in the guest room for a week, just until we can find a shelter or a place to work. We won't even use the kitchen. We'll stay out of your way. You have 4 bedrooms. Grace, please, you're our sister." I stopped and looked at them. I looked at my mother, who was looking at me with those same watery eyes she had used to guilt me into paying her bills for a decade. I looked at Chloe and Savannah, who were nodding eagerly, already imagining the soft mattresses and the air conditioning of my house. I took a slow breath and looked at the biometric scanner on my phone, the one that controlled the gateway to my sanctuary. I didn't see my family. I saw the people who had tried to forge my name to steal my life. I saw the people who had laughed about sleeping on my sofa while they took my bed. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "But my rooms are not for thieves, and they are certainly not for people who don't exist in my world anymore." "But Grace, we'll die out here," Evelyn wailed, her hands reaching out to grab my sleeve. I stepped back, signaling to the private security guards I had hired to keep them at a distance. "You should have thought about the temperature before you broke into my house," I said. "You wanted a new beginning. Well, here it is. Welcome to the life you actually earned." I got into my car and drove away, not even glancing in the rearview mirror as they stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by their trash bags. The fallout was swift and merciless. Without a car, without a home, and with a $300,000 judgment hanging over their heads. They were effectively expelled from the city. Los Angeles is a paradise for the wealthy, but it is a furnace for the poor, within 48 hours. They had been evicted from the motel in Van Nuys for non-payment. Juliana called me one last time to tell me they were boarding a Greyhound bus headed for a small town in the high desert, 300 miles away, where my mother had a distant relative who lived in a trailer park. They were leaving the city they had tried so hard to conquer. Fleeing from the debt collectors and the shame of their public trial, they were gone. I returned to my house in Silver Lake that evening. I walked through the quiet, sun-drenched rooms, looking at the pristine floors and the untouched furniture. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean. The stain of their greed had been scrubbed away by the legal system I had mastered. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. Looking out at the lights of Los Angeles, the fortress was finally silent. The gates were locked. The sensors were active, and the only person with the key was the only person who had ever truly belonged there. I was Grace Lockridge, and I was finally, truly, home. The passage of 12 months has a way of scrubbing the sharp edges off a memory, turning a traumatic explosion into a dull, manageable ache. It was a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 year since the sheriff's deputies had towed my mother's car away from the downtown courthouse. I was standing in my kitchen in Silver Lake, the late afternoon sun pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long geometric shadows across the white marble floor. The house was silent, but it was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of a fortress under siege. It was the quiet of a life that had finally been balanced. Juliana was sitting at the breakfast bar, peeling an orange. She had become a frequent guest, the only person from the Lockridge bloodline who was allowed to cross the biometric threshold of my home. We didn't talk about the others much. From what she told me, Brianna was working at a dry cleaner in a dusty town near the Nevada border, and Savannah was living in a shared dorm for low-income workers. Chloe had vanished from the grid entirely after her social media accounts were permanently banned for fraud. They were ghosts, drifting through a world that no longer recognized their names. A courier arrived at 2:15, ringing the doorbell with a package that required a signature. I walked to the door, my thumbprint effortlessly disarming the security system with a soft, melodic chime. The package was a small, padded envelope with no return address, postmarked from a high desert zip code I recognized all too well. I took it back to the kitchen and opened it while Juliana watched me with a wary expression. I tipped the envelope over, and a heavy object clattered onto the marble counter. It was the original brass key, the one my mother had surreptitiously duplicated a year ago. It was now covered in a thin layer of orange rust, the metal pitted and dull. Along with the key was a single sheet of lined paper, covered in the frantic, sprawling handwriting of a woman who had run out of lies. The letter was a masterpiece of manufactured tragedy. "Grace," it began, "my health is failing. The doctors say the stress of the last year has taken 10 years off my life. I am writing this from a place of true repentance. I wake up every night in this trailer, hearing the wind, and I realize that I destroyed the only thing that mattered. I am sorry for the house. I am sorry for the key. I have nothing left, not even the strength to keep going. I just wanted you to have the key back. It belongs to you, just like my heart always has. If I am gone by the time you read this, please know that I forgive you for everything." I read the words with a clinical detachment that would have terrified the Grace Lockridge of 2 years ago. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I didn't feel the urge to call her or send money to a desert clinic. I simply saw the final, desperate attempt of a predator to find a new vulnerability. The mention of forgiving me for her own crimes was the signature move of a narcissist who refused to die without the last word. "Is it from her?" Juliana asked. Her voice hushed. I didn't answer. I walked over to the modern, glass-enclosed fireplace in the living room and tapped the control panel. The blue flames flickered to life instantly. I tossed the rusted key into the center of the fire and dropped the letter in after it. I watched as the paper curled and turned to black ash in less than 10 seconds. The key would take longer to melt, but its purpose was already gone. That evening, Marcus Thorne stopped by for our quarterly legal review. He brought a bottle of scotch that cost $600 and a folder full of final settlement papers. We sat in my library, the room where the secure servers hummed behind a hidden wall, and he toasted to a year of absolute victory. "You did something remarkable." "Grace," Marcus said, leaning back in the leather chair. "Most clients would have cracked under the social media pressure or the family guilt. But you held the line. You've successfully insulated yourself from every legal and financial tie they ever had to you. They are officially non-entities in your life." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass and looked at Marcus. He was a brilliant attorney, but even he didn't know the full extent of the architecture I had designed. "Marcus, do you remember when you asked me how my mother managed to get that spare key so easily?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He nodded. "You said she took it from the counter while you were in the shower." I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that made him go still. That was the story for the court. But the truth is, I put that key on the counter because I wanted her to take it. I had been watching them for months. Marcus, long before I booked that trip to Switzerland, I knew they were planning something. I had seen the messages on Brianna's iPad during a family dinner 3 months before I left. They were already talking about how to take over the house if I ever went away. Marcus lowered his glass, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I spent 90 days preparing the battlefield." I said, "I knew that if I just said no, they would keep coming for me for the rest of my life. They would keep asking for loans, keep guilt-tripping me, keep poisoning my reputation. I needed a way to cut them out permanently, legally, and with enough force that they could never return. So, I created an opening. I explained it to him with the same precision I used for a security audit. I had hired a third-party acquaintance, someone my mother thought was a disgruntled former employee of mine, to meet her at a bar. That person accidentally let it slip that I was planning to leave the house empty for a month and that I was too arrogant to change the locks from the basic brass ones. I planted the idea that the house was the ultimate prize. I left the key on the counter like a piece of bait. The entire Swiss vacation was a setup. I continued. I wanted them to feel bold. I wanted them to move their furniture in. I wanted them to commit a documented felony in front of a dozen high-definition cameras, if I had caught them at the door on day one. It would have been a trespassing warning, by letting them occupy it for 6 hours and attempt to sell my property. I ensured they would face grand theft and conspiracy charges. I didn't just protect my house, Marcus. I invited them in so I could lock the door behind them and hand the key to the police. Marcus stared at me for a long time, the silence in the library growing heavy, and the debt, he whispered. Julian Mercer buying those loans. I leaned forward. Julian is a friend, but I am the one who funded the holding company that bought the debt. Lockridge Defense Systems is a subsidiary of a shell corporation I set up in the Cayman Islands 5 years ago. I am the loan shark. Marcus, I am the one who owns Chloe's $40,000 debt and my mother's back taxes. I didn't want a partner to have leverage over them. I wanted to be the one who decided whether they could buy a car or rent an apartment for the next 30 years. I didn't just evict them from a building. I evicted them from a functional existence in society. The realization of what I had done seemed to hit him all at once. I hadn't just been a victim who fought back. I had been the architect of their entire collapse. I had played the role of the grieving, betrayed daughter so perfectly that even my own lawyer believed I was reacting to their moves. In reality, every move they made was a response to a trap I had set months in advance. You're a dangerous woman, Grace, Marcus said, though there was a hint of professional admiration in his voice. I'm a woman who knows how to secure a perimeter. I replied. After Marcus left, I walked through the house, checking the monitors one last time. Everything was green. Every sensor was calibrated. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom, the suite that Brianna had fought so hard to claim for her makeup tutorials. The room was bathed in the soft, silver glow of the moon reflecting off the pool outside. I stood at the door and placed my index finger on the small glass panel. The lock disengaged with a satisfying, metallic click. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. My sisters had thought they could take this room because I was single, because I was alone, because I didn't have a real family. They thought my success was a communal pool they could dip their buckets into whenever they felt thirsty. But as I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the city lights of Los Angeles, I realized that I was never alone. I was surrounded by the walls I had built, protected by the laws I had mastered, and sustained by the intelligence they had always underestimated. I looked at the spot on the wall where Brianna had wanted to hang her vanity mirror. It was empty, a clean white space of my own choosing. I lay back against the pillows, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a shield. There were no more group chats. There were no more fake apologies. There was only the absolute, unyielding peace of a victory that had been earned through cold, calculated fire. The Lockridge family had wanted to turn my home into their playground. Instead, I had turned their lives into a cautionary tale. I closed my eyes, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in a year. The fortress was finally, truly, mine, and the gates would never, ever open again. Thank you for listening to this story of a daughter who learned that blood is not always thicker than water, especially when that water is used to drown out the toxicity of the past. If you enjoyed this journey of high-stakes revenge, please leave a comment below letting us know where in the world you are listening from today. We love to hear your thoughts and share in the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover this tale of justice and boundaries. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing these intense stories to life.